Okay, it occurred to me that I don't often show a lot of my machines in as found condition before I've done anything to them. Usually I like to do videos of machines that play and at least start together. Now this one is a Victrola the 9th. It's VVIX. It was made mid-year 1915. It was the first of the IXs, the 9ths, to have feet. That's these little feet here. Before that, this was all flat on the bottom. And even earlier models would have a piano hinge there. A friend of mine found this at a local flea market that I did not attend, and he bought it because he knew it was a good deal and I would be able to do something with it. He had to carry this back to the car. It weighs about, I guess, 47 pounds, somewhere around there. He didn't know how to take it apart because he doesn't know anything about Victrolas really, or anti-phonographs at all. He didn't realize the motor board, that's right there, could be removed and carried separately. That would have made his life a lot simpler, but he failed to call and ask me, so I couldn't tell him in advance. Now this one is one of the harder to find oak machines. Now these came in mahogany and oak, and in the teens and 20s, mahogany was the finish most preferred by customers buying some of the more upscale machines. And this is an upscale machine. It's like the lowest tier of the upscale. You're not going to find gold-plated fixtures and all of that in here. But it was the largest of the tabletop models. Biggest horn, 2-spring motor. This is a step up from the Victrola the 6th, and big step up from the 4. And from here, you pretty much went to a floor model, like the Victrola XI, something like that. You know, the 12s, the 14s, the 16s. But it's a very nice machine. It's oak. It's harder to find this because back then they just didn't care that much for oak. It was considered a lower cost finish. So it's harder to find. But today, of course, everybody loves the oak. Now, this one isn't really as bad as some I've seen. Not just because it's oak, just the finish in general. I thought at first somebody might have gone over it with some kind of not a cleaner, but a coating of some kind, like shellac maybe, but because it looked a little shiny. But I don't think so. I think they just scrubbed it with some Brillo pads and some cleaning solutions to get some of the filth off of it. I see it's somewhat still dark, and usually when these things get fully refinished, the first thing to go is the original dark stain. They sand it right off, and you can tell instantly that it's not an original finish because it's too light. You know, it's just age. The process of age on shellac turns these things dark. And this one has a few little scuffs here and there. I mean, it's not bad. Stuff like this, that's easily polished away. Not polished away, but you could just wax that away. And oak has a tendency to have an open grain. Victor had a way of dealing with this. They used a compound containing seaweed that they rubbed into the grain before they put the shellac and the stain and all that stuff on it. And it filled the grain, but over years and years go by. I mean, this is, let's see, it's 102 years old. This machine's 102. So you're going to start seeing that the grain is opening up. See if I get the camera to focus. There we go. The grain is opening up a little bit, but that's normal. And somebody put a little bit of Elmer's glue in here because the panels have separated slightly. Not separated, but they've shrunk over time. A little bit of a gap starts showing up there, but that's all right. That's normal. It's not bad at all. This machine was not exposed to damp. That would be immediately apparent with the lifting of veneers and stuff like that. It's very common with Victrolas. The 9th has a lot of veneer on it. The top and side panels are all veneered. I mean, it's good wood underneath the veneer, but the veneer is just to give it that nice grain. Unlike the Victrola the 50 portable, which is mostly solid except for its top and bottom panels. This is a lot of veneer. So if you got it anywhere near damp, that veneer starts to lift, and then it becomes a big project to fix. Basically, a full restoration, and then you're refinishing everything. I try to avoid that kind of machine. I like original machines as they were, as untouched as possible. It's not always possible to get them that untouched, because after 102 years, that's a lot of owners, and they've done a lot of things keeping them up over the years. And this one, the biggest no-no that I found was this. I'll show you. That looks like a gold-plated tone arm, doesn't it? And you do find gold-plated tone arms on lots of Victrolas, but those are the upscale 16s and stuff like that. That is a tone arm with a nickel-plated finish that's had its nickel plate scrubbed off. It's very common for nickel to get corrosion on it, and there's ways to clean that corrosion and buff it out. Fairly easy, actually. But somebody decided to take some kind of sandpaper or Brillo pads to it, and they just scrubbed it off. Not a big deal. Being a 1915, this does not have the fat tone arm, and I have several nice nickel-plated tone arms for 9s put away, and I'm going to substitute one in here rather than set up my tanks and do dips and all that, which is a pain in the ass, and I hate that. Now, you see this? This is the rest for the tone arm. Only problem is it's on the wrong side. Whoever took the tone arm apart to scrub off the nickel finish didn't put it back. I mean, I would have thought that would be fairly obvious where that goes, but I guess it wasn't. It's supposed to be where the reproducer rests. The reproducer is only holding there now because it's a little bit out of alignment and it's just sticking. Now, the reproducer itself is a disaster, of course. That's expected. The isolator is badly shrunk with age, and this big, you see that giant open air leak right there? This would have sounded absolutely horrible. The needle bar is out of alignment, although it's not broken or anything, but it's just out of alignment a little bit. The gaskets are rock hard. That's got to be fully rebuilt. You will not get good sound out of a reproducer that looks like that. And then over here, these large screws right there are the screws that should be holding down the motor board, not the tone arm support. These big head screws should be here and on the motor board itself. Matter of fact, these screws are the ones that should be on the tone arm support. So I guess they got confused and they put it back together. They put it in the wrong place. They scrubbed the chemical blacking off of the nameplate. That's a chemical process. It was not paint. So I'm probably going to have to leave that. I don't want to lose the serial number, so I will keep that the way it is. Well, what can you do? They scrubbed the finish off of the hinge and the lid support, but not the crank escutcheon and not the knobs. So that's okay. I'll leave those, but I will replace this, probably swap in a new, or not new, but one of my spare hinges and lid stays. I have plenty of them. Everything else under there looks okay. We got the nice Victrola decal on there, and it's looking pretty good. And here is the motor. You never really see the motors in my machines because they're all packed away inside the machine and playing it. But this one is actually not too bad. Usually you see a lot more crud and grease on them. I don't think whoever did the machine cleaned the motor, which is pretty common. While a lot of people will play with the wood cabinets and such, using over-the-counter cleaning products and whatever, they don't like to touch the mechanicals of it because they're afraid they're going to screw something up. But they just don't know how. Don't have tools or whatever. There's nothing broken on this. It does actually work. You have the governor, looks in pretty good shape. This is the governor. Those are the governor weights, the governor springs. All looks pretty good. It's got pretty close to the right amount of play in there. See how I'm wiggling that back and forth? That's what it should sound like. Maybe a tad less, just a tad. But if you don't hear that noise, that means someone has tightened these bearings too much. And that could start to put restriction on your governor and slow your machine down. And a lot of people think they have weak springs or whatever. In fact, it's just they've tightened this too much. That's pretty good. The governor looks in pretty good shape. This being a 1915 model is the older style of motor for the 9. It has 2 individual spring cans here. Each can has 1 spring in it. Now with these, you have to be careful because it is possible to install these springs backwards if you lose track of which direction they go. So you always want to make sure you take lots of pictures should you take one out so you know the direction of each spring in those cans. Because to take it out again, after you've put it all in there with new grease, it gets very messy and it's an unpleasant job. Don't do that. So make sure if you do take out the spring, you note the direction of travel. Later on, they went to a 1-piece spring can here with 2 springs in it. While with the early ones, it is still possible to make a mistake on the direction. The later ones are slotted on both ends. No more oval hole and a pin. So it's really harder to screw those up. But you won't see those to the 1920s. But that's the older style motor, and you see that? They give you a nice diagram there to show you how everything is to be oiled and greased. Always follow the directions when the manufacturer gives you. And some of these stickers are lost over time. They fall off, they get ripped off, rodents or whatever chew them off. This one still has it. It's all on there. And look at that. We have a fairly decent turntable there. Now, I'm going to have to replace that felt. It's a little bit too far gone. I don't like to do it, but what am I going to do? Moths have eaten it. It is felt, and I don't want to ruin records, have any problems. So I'm just going to replace it. And the turntable itself is not rusty. A lot of times you will see these with rust on them. Then you have to put them in a special bath of Evaporust, which is like $22 a gallon, and it takes a couple days to do it properly. It's messy. I need a big container to put it in. So it's nice when you don't see rust. I'll replace the felt, that's fine. I hate dealing with the rust though. The crank looks in pretty good shape. They didn't seem to have done any scrubbing on that. Not that they would have found brass underneath it. That's a steel crank. Now, one of the major upgrades that they came out with, I believe it was in late 1914 or very early 1915, is they isolated the horn from the motor. Now, this is the horn in here. That's the horn. And you see it goes right up to the tone arm and to the reproducer. And the motor hangs above it, and this little tray right here they've built into it, that catches the grease that falls off the springs and whatnot. What you're looking at is 102 years worth of grease and lost phonograph needles. And even got the original chalk marks, which you see in a lot of these, from 1915. It's like a little time capsule in there. Really nice looking, nicely made machines. Now the earlier ones, this horn was actually wood in here, and the motor kind of hung in the middle of it, right in the middle of the horn chamber itself. So if you had a noisy motor, what would happen is you would sometimes hear that in the sound coming out of the front. This is your horn opening right here. You'd hear that, little whirs and clicks, and it'd get irritating if the motor was a little bit noisy. With these, that's not a problem, because the whole horn, the actual sound you're hearing from the reproducer in the record, is isolated from the motor completely. Did a really nice job. The horn kind of hangs in there suspended. All really nicely done. Victor was a genius at this. I see we have a bit of a loose hinge there. Not a big issue. That can be fixed. Just a matter of a little bit of glue and some extra wood in the screw holes. We get that tightened right up. The doors open and close pretty nice. I see the knob is loose. Also typical and why a lot of these lose knobs. And these, unlike some of the older machines, some of the 8s, early 8s and the 6s, there's a catch there. See that? So when you close the door, it stays that way. Not that these machines moved around very much. That would have caused doors to come open, but sometimes they would do it on their own if the table wasn't quite steady. And other than that, I see no real issues here. It's all a matter of cleaning up. I have to do a full service on that motor. That means that whole motor is coming off of there. It's coming entirely apart. The springs are coming out of the cans. The governor's being taken apart down to its last tiny little screw. And it's all going to be soaked in a variety of cleaners to take all that nasty old grease off. And it's going to be put back together. I don't think I'll have to replace the springs on this one. They seem to be in pretty good shape, even though they're a little bit dry. All new grease to go in there, new lubrications and everything else. Yeah, the usual service. And I will, of course, completely rebuild that reproducer, because there's no way you're getting away with using that. And it'll be a pretty nice machine when I'm done with it. I have a number of Victor the 9ths. I guess this might even be the 10th or 11th. I have another one in oak. That's 1919. So it has the fat tone arm, and it has a single spring, 2 springs in 1 can motor, all of that stuff. But other than that, it looks pretty much just like this. They didn't change them that much up to 1924 when they stopped manufacturing them. It was Victrola's most popular machine throughout the teens and early 20s. It was your typical middle-class living room, parlor, what have you, phonograph, if you didn't want a big floor model. A step up from this would have been the floor model, a Victor Victrola, the 14th or whatever, some of the smaller ones. But these fit pretty nicely in most houses, and they sold more of these, I think, than any other single Victrola throughout the whole Victrola run. So you'll find a lot of them still around. It's a fairly common machine. You can usually get a nice one. I mean, a really nice one for about, $4 or $5, maybe $600, depending on the finish and how well preserved it is. When this one's done, it's probably, if I decide to sell this, it'll be somewhere in the $350 to $450, range, because it is in nice shape and it doesn't have any major wood issues. It's really good condition. It'll be playing that way too when I get done, but I'm going to be really tempted to keep this one, because it's just that it is nice. And this, of course, this is not correct. This should have a small green disc of felt there, not these big, thick, I'm not even sure what that is. Looks like it belongs on the bottom of a cane or something. But that's all right. We'll fix that up. But this is what they commonly look like when I get them. before I've started cleaning and polishing and replacing grease and all of that stuff. Not too bad. But, you know, I have gotten a lot worse. But those are generally machines I buy for parts. Because if you play with Victrolas, you can't just go to the local Victrola dealer and say, hey, I need a lid stay for a 1915 Victor Victrola the 9th. Or I need a set of, you know, I need a new reproducer, or I need a crank. You know, there just are no places you can go other than eBay for those things. So when I get an opportunity to get a machine that's maybe a complete basket case, I'll buy it just for the parts a lot of times. Unfortunately, you find them that way because they've been stored in basements and old sheds and just beaten up and things stacked on them, roofs leak on them. Especially these ones. So, you know, the smaller machines might have got stuck in a closet in the house somewhere, but these tended to end up in more unpleasant places because of their size. But there you go. Victor Victrola the 9th, 1915. And I'll do a follow-up video when the time comes and it's all done. Be a while because it's gotten cold out now. I think today the high is like 38 degrees out here. So I'm not going to be playing too much cold and flat springs that Victor Victrolas use, or any portable phonograph of this era. Cold is not their friend. You could snap a spring if you do that, if you crank them hard in the cold. You know, and it just don't, and a lot of times the grease gets very thick and it could hold back the spring a little bit. So I usually do my demonstrations outside with these machines when it's, you know, a lot warmer, and I don't like to work in my unheated shed when it gets cold either. You know, arthritis flares up its head, and that's the end of that. But thought you'd like a look. There you go. For those who were wondering, what do they look like before you do anything to them? Not that I do much to the cases anyway, but most of my work's mechanical. Well, there you go.